One of the hardest things you'll ever learn to do in this life is face yourself. Not the curated version from social media, not the one that gets everything right, but the one that's been quietly carrying a truth you haven't really wanted to look at. Like, I might be the problem, or this habit I call self-care is just how I actually hide, or joy doesn't feel real to me anymore because I stopped practicing it. These aren't the truths that get posted online with the sunrise background. They don't go viral. They go inward. And they tend to show up when it's quiet, when there's no one to impress, no one to defend yourself to. It's just you, sitting in the truth of your own reflection. And that's what this episode is about. Because not all truths are soothing. Some of them sting, especially when they chip away at the stories we've been telling ourselves to survive. And biologically, your brain resists that sting. Research shows that confronting information that threatens our self-perception activates a threat response in the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that lights up during physical pain and social rejection. Your mind doesn't just hear the truth, it categorizes it and then wires it into the brain, and sometimes it puts it into the danger file. That means resistance isn't failure, it's wiring. And yet, if you can stay with that discomfort just long enough to look closer, something shifts. Because neuroplasticity isn't powered by ease, it's powered by interruption. Interruption loosens up the protein and chemical networks in the brain and body, making them malleable, which means they can be changed by friction, by facing the very thing you usually avoid. The moment you pause and say, wait, what if that is true? That's the moment your mind starts to rewire your brain in the right direction. And that's exactly what this episode is for. In this week's episode, we're walking through the 5 hard truths that don't coddle, don't flatter, and don't trend. But they do invite something rare. Growth that starts with honesty. The kind of honesty that says, you're not bad, you're not broken, but it might be time to face this. Let's begin. Before we get started, just take a moment to notice what's happening in your body. Maybe there's tension in your jaw. Maybe your chest feels tight. Maybe you're really hoping this episode stays vague enough that it doesn't land too hard. That's not avoidance. It's your conscious mind becoming aware of the patterns wired into your brain and your body. Your mind knows when something might challenge what you've been using to cope. Your non-conscious, most intelligent part of your mind tracks tone, phrasing, and impact before the words even fully register in your conscious mind. But you pressed play anyway. And that means something in you is willing to look a little closer. Subscribing to this show isn't about agreeing with every word. It's about choosing a place where honesty isn't delivered like a lecture or a list of things to fix, but as something you can sit with and sort through at your own pace. So if this episode meets you in a place you haven't had words for yet, follow. That's all. Let it be a rhythm you come back to when things feel loud or flat or just a little too familiar. Now, let's continue with today's episode. Sometimes it's you. Let's start here because it's the one most people skip. There's a point in every healing process where you realize not everything that hurt you was someone else's fault. Hard. And not everything that's still hurting is someone else's job to fix. That's a hard place to land. It's easier to focus on what was done to you because that's the part that's very clear, traceable, documented. But the longer you sit with yourself, the more you start to see the subtler patterns, the way you deflect, the way you justify, the way you keep old stories on repeat because they give you the role that doesn't require responsibility. This doesn't mean you deserved what happened. It doesn't mean you're to blame for your pain. But it does mean that if you want real change, you have to look at the ways you've been reinforcing what you say you want to break. Here's the science. You know me, I love science. When we blame others chronically, which is all the time ongoing, this activates the conscious mind first, followed by the brain's default mode network, which is a set of brain structures deep inside the brain associated with narrative building, rumination, emotional reactivity, and cognitive flexibility. This network can trap you in a story loop that feels familiar but keeps you stuck. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for self-evaluation and error monitoring, can be suppressed when blame becomes a habit. That makes it harder to course correct, even when we know we need it. This means that your mind can literally become less skilled at noticing your own role in a dynamic unless you start practicing that awareness intentionally. So how do you shift? Okay, try this prompt. What's my part in this pattern? Do it without the defense, without the shame, just the facts. What's my part in this? This is not me. This is who I've become because of something going on in my life. That kind of phrase can really help you start shifting. You might find that asking that kind of question isn't what hurts. It's the answer. But if you can sit with the answer, with the discomfort, without spiraling into guilt or distraction or shame, you unlock something so incredibly powerful. The ability to move, the ability to reroute, to stop rehearsing powerlessness, to tap into the wisdom of your unconscious. This chapter isn't just about self-blame, it's about self-return. Because when you stop outsourcing accountability, you stop outsourcing growth. There's comfort in having a name for the thing you struggle with. It gives shape to your experience. It explains the unexplainable. And for many people, real diagnoses have brought real relief, validation, and access to support. But something else is happening online. We are watching people reduce personality traits to pathology. Quick to call emotional variability bipolar, or social discomfort autism, or impulsiveness ADHD. And while these experiences are definitely so real for so many, the labels are being flattened into trends which can minimize the suffering of many. What gets lost in that flattening is agency, your agency. Here's what the science says. Over-identifying with a label, especially unverified ones, can train the brain to route everything through the lens of dysfunction. You wire in an incorrect pathway that closes the door to your resilience. The more you rehearse a label without active reflection, the more that pathway becomes your default response. Remember, the brain doesn't think, it only does what your mind tells it to do. So if it's telling you that's the way to do it, that's what it's going to do. Neuroimaging studies show us that internalizing pathology correlates with changes in your brain, like increased amygdala reactivity and decreased activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is here. These structures are designed or structured to respond to executive functions and emotional regulation. So when they don't work properly, you lose those functions. Translation, you start reacting more and regulating less. That's bottom line what it means. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes what you've been calling a diagnosis might be a defense. Not because your pain isn't real, but because it's easier to name something than to change it. So let's ground this in compassion. If you've self-labeled, you're not weak. You're human. You were trying to find language for something that just didn't make sense in your life. But you don't have to stay inside a story that keeps shrinking your options. Try this instead. Is this state a signal or an identity? Is it asking for care or has it become a cover? Hard questions, good truths. You don't have to disown the label, but you do get to rewrite what it means to carry it. See it as a description versus you. Chapter 3. Happiness is a choice, not a prize you win. We tend to talk about happiness like it's something we earn, like it shows up at the end of healing. Like if you do all the right things, it'll greet you one day and never leave. But here's what psycho-neurobiology and neuroscience actually shows. Happiness isn't an arrival point. It's a practiced rhythm, a recalibration. And seeking after happiness can actually increase depression. I also talk about that in depth in my new book, Help in a Hurry. Studies on the reward system of the brain show that when people actually regularly rehearse positive emotion, even in small doses, their brains start to shift into functioning better. Small little practices. The parts of the brain called the ventral striatum becomes more sensitive to positive anticipation. Dopamine release becomes more efficient, and emotional recovery becomes faster. This means that joy isn't the result of everything being okay, it's the result of noticing something good and letting yourself feel it even when things aren't okay. So it's in the process. But here's why this truth is hard. If you've built your life around waiting for joy to arrive as a kind of end goal, the idea that it's already available can feel offensive, like someone's minimizing your struggle. But it's not minimization, trust me. You don't have to earn joy, but you do have to rehearse it. So try this today. Say one good thing out loud, not for performance, just for the presence. It might feel fake, it might feel awkward, but that's what practice is. It's the muscle memory of meaning. And your conscious mind, it's listening and it's adjusting the wiring in the brain. Because that's what the conscious mind does. Processes data, rewires the brain. Every time you choose to name something true and good, you're building a neural pathway that makes it easier next time. Not because your circumstances changed, but because your attention did. You changed. This one might feel a little personal because it is. Sugar. Sugar isn't just a dietary choice, it's an emotional one. It's how a lot of us self-soothe. It's how we mark comfort, reward, transition. We reach for it when we're tired, sad, bored, anxious, sometimes before we've even named the feeling. We're reaching for the sugary thing. But here's the reality. Sugar doesn't just shift your mood, it shifts your biology. Neuroscience research has shown us that high sugar consumption is linked to decreased hippocampal volume, which means that there's going to be impaired short to long-term memory problems, and even reduced neuroplasticity, the very thing your brain needs to heal and adapt. And this isn't about shame, this is about information. If your psycho-neurobiology is the system that helps you make decisions, regulate emotions, recover from trauma, and access joy, then what you feed it matters. Your mind-brain-body connection is real. Here's what to ask yourself. Is this sugar moment solving something or softening something I haven't faced? You're not bad for craving it, guys. You're not broken for reaching for it. We've all done it. Me too. But if you're noticing more fog, more forgetfulness, more emotional edge, this might be part of it. And the solution isn't to restrict, it's to recognize. Restricting is not going to make anything happen or change. Recognizing will help you change. Notice the moment. Ask the question. Give your body something real to work with. Because your brain doesn't need perfection, but it does need support. We usually talk about movement like it's a lifestyle choice or a weight thing. But your psycho-neurobiology, your mind-brain-body connection, sees it differently. To your brain, movement is information. When you sit for too long, or for long periods without moving, your brain and body start to receive less input. Blood flow slows, neural activation patterns flatten, and over time, cognitive function just doesn't work well. It weakens. A study published in 2020 showed that sedentary behavior is linked to reduced thickness in the medial temporal lobe, one of the areas that is designed to help with memory consolidation and learning. Another study found that even in young adults, extended sitting led to decreases in cerebral blood flow, that's blood flow to this part of the brain, particularly in regions responsible for attention and executive function. Here's what that means in plain terms. When your body stops moving, your brain stops sharpening. And this is where the hard truth lands. Stillness feels neutral, but it has a cost, especially when it becomes the default, especially when your days blur together, especially when fatigue becomes your reason and your routine. But we don't need perfection, we need pattern interruption. Try this micro shift. Every 30 to 60 minutes, stand up, walk to the next room, reach for something overhead, roll your shoulders. Not for the steps, for the stimulation. Not for the punishment, for the presence. You don't have to become a fitness person. You just need to stop rehearsing stagnation. Your brain is plastic. Your mind changes your brain. But it's also very responsive. Your brain responds to the mind. And movement sends the signal. I'm here, I'm awake. You can know something is true, but still feel like it's an attack. That's not emotional weakness. That's neural wiring. It's networks wired into your brain and body. Your psycho-neurobiology is designed to protect your stability, your survival, especially the kind that helps you feel like you know who you are. So important, your self-identity. So when someone or something introduces a truth that disrupts your self-concept, it can activate the same circuits in the brain that fire during social rejection, pain, or threat. The anterior cingulate cortex towards the middle of your brain, deep inside, in particular, is structured to respond to emotional conflict as an error, which shows up as high beta brainwaves. The conscious mind leans towards familiarity, which means that if the insight is new but the belief is old, your conscious mind might push the truth away just to keep the narrative stable, and that creates these waves in the brain that are disruptive. It's why growth feels like friction. Those waves will make you feel friction. But friction isn't danger, it's data. And data is wonderful because if we lean into the friction, we tap into the wisdom that data provides, and our deep unconscious level will activate. You don't have to absorb every insight instantly, but you do have to recognize when you're dismissing something because it makes you feel uncomfortable. Here's a grounding question. Am I rejecting this because it's wrong or because it threatens what I've got used to? Your psycho-neurobiology isn't your enemy, guys, but it does need the guidance of the non-conscious mind, and sometimes that guidance sounds like, "Ugh, I know this feels hard. Let's stay with it anyway." Because the truth isn't dangerous. Denial is. Shame doesn't lead to accountability. It leads to hiding. And if your healing is rooted in shame, your self-evaluation sounds like an attack. You're not building insight, you're reinforcing fear. Psycho-neurobiological research supports this. Brain scans show that shame-based reflection lights up the amygdala and deactivates part of the prefrontal cortex, which is the area involved in decision-making, planning, forward motion, and also your identity. This part lights up when our identity is strong. You can't learn well from a place that makes you feel like a failure. That's why real growth happens through reflective insight, not blame, not spiraling, not perfectionism, pretending to be accountable. Reflective insight sounds like this. That didn't quite go how I wanted. What do I need to understand about that pattern? It's curious, not crushing. It's investigative, not indicting. Try this instead of shaming yourself. What did this moment reveal about what I have been rehearsing? And what's the one thing I can rehearse differently tomorrow? Truth doesn't require you to punish the version of yourself that didn't know better. It just asks you not to keep defending it. There's something your psycho won't ask for, but often needs to be interrupted. Not with noise, not with urgency, with something real. The kind of truth that doesn't soften itself. The kind that asks more from you, not as punishment, but as possibility. Here's what the research tells us. The brain clings to patterns that have been wired in by the mind, even painful ones, because they're wired in. They're stuck, they're there, and are therefore predictable. Anything unfamiliar then feels like a risk, even if it's the truth. So when you hear something that challenges how you see yourself, your brain isn't deciding whether it's true. What it's doing is responding to whether you feel safe in your mind. That means resistance doesn't mean the insight is wrong. It means it touched something rehearsed. But there's a shift that happens quietly when you hear the same truth again. First, it feels a little jarring. Then it feels familiar. And eventually it starts to feel honest. Sometimes clarity shows up as discomfort that won't actually go away. Not to shame you, not to prove a point, but to invite you to stop rehearsing that disruptive pattern, that version of you that no longer fits and is no longer helping you. It's not judgment. That's disrupting the psycho-neurobiological network, and that's a good thing to interrupt. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about recognizing when your current pattern has reached its limit. It's not working for you anymore. It was compensation and worked for a time. If this stirred something uncomfortable, it's not a call-out. It's a checkpoint that I'm trying to put in place for you. You're not being asked to perform insight. You're being asked to stay with what's noticed, what you noticed. Let's start there. We've covered a lot of ground today, and maybe not the kind you wanted to walk across. There's some deep things that we've got to face. I know these truths weren't easy, and that was the point I was trying to make. But they also weren't cruel. They were clear, and clarity is what your brain builds on. Not because it feels good, but because it gives you something solid to stand on, even when everything else is moving all around you. You didn't have to digest all of this at once. You don't have to agree with every word I've said. But if something landed, if something hit a place you didn't have language for until now, come back to it. Let it work on you a little. Because growth isn't a rush, it's a rhythm. And the fact that you stayed for this entire episode, that says something about you, and I'm proud of you. You're capable of clarity. You're willing to look. You're stronger than your rehearsal reaction. So take that next breath. Come back to your body and remember, you don't need to prove anything today. You just need to stay honest, and I'll meet you there. And if you want more, get my book, Help in a Hurry. I'll meet you in this book. It's filled with all these truths that I've been talking about today and that I talk about on my podcast. Simple things that you can do in under 60 seconds to help you in these moments that you need help. It's on pre-order now. It's coming out on the 5th of August, and there are amazing bonuses worth up to $900. So just go to helpinahurrybook.com and pre-order. See you next time.